Are there different types of souls?
Well, in Thomistic and Aristotelian philosophy, there are. But what they mean by soul in this case is the organizing principle of the being. So, for example, is there a soul which is the organizing principle for life, what we would call an animalic soul? Yes, but that's very different from a human, self-conscious, transcendent soul.
Okay.
So that's a very, very different thing itself. So again, is there a soul appropriate to plant life, to metabolism, to growth, and so forth? Yes. Aristotle would say yes, there is. So you basically have one that's appropriate to life. You have a soul, quote unquote soul, an organizing principle that's appropriate to animal sensibility and animal awareness of pain and animal consciousness, right? And then you have a human soul, a rational soul, a self-conscious soul, a transcendental soul. So these are the various dimensions of the three kinds of soul that are admitted, but of course those views of soul as organizing principle are very different from what we mean in the technical sense by the human soul I was describing first in the program.
Well, that goes into the question that everybody wants to know. Does Fido basically have a soul? Or if Fido has a soul, is it an immortal soul? Meaning, if I have these wonderful pets, will I see them in the next life? We've heard that, kind of bandied about in different ways in the sense of whether that, in fact, they don't have an immortal soul, so they can't. And even the Holy Father not that long ago kind of inferred that, yes, you will, or just the idea that, if that's what it takes for you to be perfectly happy, then I guess they'll be there. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, the kind of soul we're talking about in an animal soul, as I said before, is the organizing principle of their powers and their embodiment. So that kind of soul in an animal, there's nothing in that which per se is transcendent. And therefore, we have said there's nothing about an animal soul that is necessarily going to survive bodily death, because there's nothing transcendental in an animal soul. Now, that doesn't mean that God couldn't take an animal and allow an animal to live, in the resurrection. So for all intents and purposes, we see in Paul's letter to the Romans, I believe it's chapter 8, where he is actually talking about the whole creation is yearning for redemption, right, in God. So he's talking about this idea that God's going to bring everything, not just animals, but he's also going to bring rocks and grass into some sort of a next life a sort of redemption that Paul believes that God not only wants to do this, but after the fall, it's God's intention to do this so that creation is redeemed. So it's perfectly plausible, and it could be perfectly argued that a dog, for example, could be in the kingdom of heaven, and even my pet Fido could be in the kingdom of heaven. There's nothing about Aristotelian philosophy that precludes that from happening, but there's just nothing in Aristotelian philosophy that says it will happen from the transcendental nature of the soul. But there is a hint from Paul, from St. Paul, that it could happen, and because of the redemption of creation, and of course, what they say, God can do whatever He wishes, and there is nothing that precludes Him from making Fido be present in heaven. So for all intents and purposes, it's perfectly possible and even plausible that it could happen in light of St. Paul's views.